The mirror was still warm from the lights around it. A dressing room that had seen too many faces, too many transformations, too many versions of beauty rehearsed and erased. And yet, that night, when Bonnie Mbuli stood in front of it, something didn't align. No, not the lighting, not the angle, not even the silence. It was the face. Not unfamiliar, but not hers. There was a hesitation, barely a second, before her hand rose, fingers hovering just inches away from her own reflection, as if touching it might confirm something irreversible. The cheekbones, sharper now, but not sculpted, forced. The lips, fuller, but strained, like they were holding a secret they couldn't keep. The eyes, still hers. Yes, but surrounded by something tighter. Something that refused to soften no matter how gently she blinked. And then, that quiet, suffocating realization. No one had warned her about this part. Not the doctors with their measured voices and perfect before and after portfolios. Not the friends who said, "You'll look amazing." Not even the industry that had, for years, whispered into her ears that beauty was currency, that perfection was survival. No one prepared her for the moment when the surgery would end. But the disorientation would begin. Because the change wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with a dramatic reveal or a collective gasp. It was subtle. Too subtle. The kind of change that creeps in through small details. The way her smile no longer reached the same places. The way laughter felt. Delayed. Like it had to travel through something unfamiliar before it could escape. The way old photographs, those effortless, unfiltered moments, suddenly looked like they belonged to someone she used to know, not someone she used to be. She picked one up, a photo from years ago, bare face, natural light, a softness that didn't need to prove itself. She stared at it longer than she meant to. Not because it was better, no, that word didn't fit, but because it was certain. There was no hesitation in that girl's eyes, no questioning, no second-guessing every angle, every shadow, every expression. That girl didn't know she would one day sit in a chair, under sterile lights, listening to someone redraw her identity with clinical precision. And now, every reflection felt like a negotiation. Angles mattered more. Lighting mattered more. Expressions had to be rehearsed, adjusted, corrected. Because something had shifted beneath the surface, something deeper than skin, deeper than symmetry. Identity had become unstable. She began to notice it in the smallest moments. A pause before stepping into public spaces. A flicker of anxiety when someone looked at her for too long. The subtle, almost invisible tilt of a stranger's head. The kind that says, "Something is different," without ever saying it out loud. And the worst part? No one could quite name it. They would compliment her. Of course they would. That's what people do. "You look refreshed." "Something's changed, but I can't tell what." "You look interesting." Interesting. A word that lingers too long. A word that doesn't settle. A word that feels like it's hiding something just beneath its surface. At night, the silence grew heavier. Because that's when the performance ended. No cameras, no curated angles, no controlled lighting. Just her. And the mirror. Again, always the mirror. She would lean closer sometimes, studying the details as if she could map them back to something familiar. Tracing the lines, the curves, the places where the surgeon's hand had intervened, altered, refined. Except refinement wasn't the right word anymore. It suggested improvement, evolution, something forward-moving. But this felt like a detour, a version of herself that existed slightly off-center, slightly out of sync with the person she remembered being. And memory became dangerous. Because the more she reached for it, the more it slipped. Was her nose always like that? Did her jawline used to soften when she smiled? Were her eyes always this guarded? Questions without answers. Or worse, questions with answers she couldn't fully trust. There were moments, brief, fragile moments, when she almost convinced herself it was okay, that this was just an adjustment period. That identity, like everything else, evolves. But then she would catch herself off guard. A reflection in a window she wasn't prepared for. A candid photo taken without her control. A split second where her face moved in a way she didn't recognize. And just like that, the illusion would crack. Not dramatically, just enough to let doubt seep through. And doubt, once it finds its way in, doesn't leave quietly. There was a time, before the mirror became a question, when everything about her face felt like an answer. Before the hesitation, before the second-guessing, before the quiet, creeping distance between who she was and who she saw. Back then, Bonnie Mbuli didn't need to look twice, because the world had already looked for her and stayed. Lights followed her like they recognized something rare. Not loud beauty, not exaggerated perfection, but something that held people still. A kind of presence that didn't demand attention. It absorbed it. Directors noticed it first, then cameras, then audiences who couldn't quite explain why they kept watching her scenes longer than necessary. Her face, it wasn't just admired, it was trusted. There was a softness in her expressions that felt honest, almost disarming. The kind of beauty that didn't intimidate, didn't shout, didn't compete. It simply existed. And in doing so, quietly set a standard others tried to imitate but never fully understood. She looks real. That was the word people used. Real. As if that alone was something rare enough to be celebrated. And maybe it was. Because in an industry built on illusion, she carried something that couldn't be rehearsed. A natural symmetry that didn't feel engineered. A smile that arrived without permission, without calculation. Even her imperfections, if they could be called that, felt intentional, like they belonged exactly where they were meant to be. Photographers loved her for that, not because she transformed in front of the lens, but because she didn't need to. There was no better angle, no fix this side, no adjust that expression. She was already enough. And that became her identity. Not just beautiful, but the kind of beauty people referenced when they talked about authenticity. She doesn't try. She just is. She's the standard. The standard, a word that sounds like praise until it becomes a weight. Because standards don't get to change. They don't get tired. They don't get uncertain. They don't wake up one day and feel different. They are expected to remain frozen, perfect, unshaken by time, by pressure, by the quiet erosion that comes with being constantly seen. And she was seen, everywhere. Red carpets, where flashes blurred into a single continuous glare. Interviews where every close-up captured more than just her words. Roles that leaned into her presence, her face becoming part of the story before she even spoke a line. There were moments, small, almost invisible moments, when she felt it. That shift. A glance that lingered a second too long, not out of admiration, but comparison. A comment that sounded like a compliment, but carried an edge. You still look amazing. Still, a word that arrives with time attached to it. A word that quietly reminds you that something is expected to fade. And suddenly, beauty wasn't just something she had. It was something she had to protect, maintain, defend. The mirror, back then, was not an enemy. It was a checkpoint, a place to confirm that everything was still intact, that the image the world believed in hadn't shifted. She learned the rituals, the lighting that flattered, the angles that reassured, the expressions that held everything together. Not because she doubted herself, but because she understood the cost of being seen as the standard. Because once you are placed there, you don't get to step down, not without consequence, not without questions. And the pressure, it didn't arrive all at once. It built slowly, quietly, in between compliments, in between roles, in between the unspoken expectation that she would remain exactly as she had always been, unchanged, untouched, unfaltering. But time doesn't negotiate, and neither does perception. There were days when she would look at old footage, not out of nostalgia, but out of necessity, studying herself the way others did, searching for differences so small they almost didn't exist, until they did. A line that wasn't there before, a softness that had shifted, a glow that felt less certain. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else would notice immediately. But she did. Of course she did. Because when your face becomes your identity, you learn to see changes long before the world names them. And somewhere, quietly, without a single defining moment, the idea began to form. Not as a decision. Not yet. More like a whisper. A possibility. A way to stay where she had always been. Instead of risking the fall no one ever talks about. It didn't begin with a decision. Not a clear one. Not the kind you can point to and say, this was the moment everything changed. It began softer than that. A sentence, half spoken, half dismissed. Just a small adjustment. Nothing drastic. They said it lightly, almost casually, as if they were suggesting a different shade of lipstick, not a shift in identity. And she didn't say yes, not immediately. She smiled, nodded, let the words pass through her like background noise. But something stayed, not the suggestion itself, but the possibility of it. Because once a possibility exists, it doesn't leave quietly. It lingers, in between conversations, in between glances at the mirror, in between those quiet, fragile moments when confidence isn't loud enough to drown out doubt. And the doubt, it wasn't loud either. It didn't scream. It didn't demand attention. It whispered, soft enough to ignore, but persistent enough to return. Maybe just a little refinement. Maybe just a slight correction. Maybe nothing anyone would even notice. That was the promise, not transformation, just preservation. Because no one ever says, change your face. They say, maintain it. Enhance what's already there. Stay the same, just better. And that's how it begins, not with dissatisfaction, but with the fear of losing something that once felt permanent. She started seeing it everywhere. Subtle, curated perfection on screens. Faces that didn't age, didn't shift, didn't falter under time. And suddenly, reality felt negotiable, adjustable, fixable. There was a conversation. She barely remembers when. A room that smelled faintly sterile, though it wasn't a clinic. A voice that spoke with certainty, the kind that makes uncertainty feel like a flaw. You don't need much. That line again. Reassuring, disarming, dangerously simple. As if needing just a little made it safer. As if small changes couldn't carry large consequences. She laughed it off at first. Of course she did. Because she was still the woman who didn't need to try. Still the face that didn't require correction. Still the standard. But standards don't get to age quietly. They are watched, measured, compared, sometimes against versions of themselves that no longer exist. And the mirror, it started changing again. Not physically, not yet, but perceptually. A tilt of the head, a longer pause, a question that didn't used to be there. Is this still enough? It's a dangerous question, because it doesn't ask for truth. It asks for reassurance, and reassurance, when you need it too much, can be bought. There was a day, nothing special about it. No dramatic breakdown, no moment of collapse, just a quiet afternoon. The kind where time feels stretched, where thoughts echo louder than they should. She stood in front of the mirror again. Of course, always the mirror. But this time, she didn't look for confirmation. She looked for flaws. Not because they were obvious, but because she had learned how to find them. A slight asymmetry, a subtle shift, a detail no one else would ever notice. until she pointed it out, and once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. That's the moment. Not when someone tells you to change, but when you start telling yourself, it's small, it's nothing, it won't change who I am. Those are the thoughts that make it feel safe, manageable, reversible. But decisions like this, they don't feel heavy when you make them. They feel logical, almost necessary, like fixing something before it becomes a problem, like staying ahead of time instead of being caught by it. And so, the appointment wasn't dramatic. No long hesitation, no visible fear, just a confirmation, a date, a quiet, almost unremarkable step forward. Because when something is presented as small, you don't prepare for it to become large. You don't imagine consequences. You don't picture yourself standing in a room later, staring at a reflection that feels slightly displaced. You just think, this will help. And maybe that's the most dangerous part. Not the surgery itself, not the change, but the belief, the quiet, steady belief that you are walking toward control, when in reality, you are stepping into something you cannot fully predict. The room was too quiet when she woke up. Not silent. No, there were sounds. Machines humming somewhere behind her. Soft footsteps passing by. A distant voice, calm, professional, detached. But inside her, nothing moved. No rush of relief, no excitement, no curiosity. Just a stillness that felt unfamiliar, as if something had already happened. And her body knew it before her mind could catch up. She didn't reach for the mirror immediately. That would have been too direct, too intentional. Instead, her fingers moved first, slowly, cautiously, tracing the edges of her own face, as if mapping a place she used to know. A pause, a hesitation. Because even through touch, something felt different. Not wrong, not yet, just not the same. They said everything went well. A voice nearby, gentle, reassuring, practiced. The kind of voice designed to smooth over uncertainty before it has a chance to form. And she nodded. Of course she did. Because what else do you do in that moment? You trust. You wait. You believe that whatever you're feeling is temporary. Swelling, adjustment, healing. Words that sound like promises. Words that suggest time will fix everything. So she waited. Hours, then days. And slowly, the bandages came off. Not all at once. Piece by piece. Layer by layer. Until there was nothing left between her and the mirror. Again. Always the mirror. But this time, she didn't lean in, didn't adjust the angle, didn't search for the best light. She just looked. And for a moment, just a moment, her mind tried to do what it always does. Make sense of it. Normalize it, explain it away. It's swelling, it's temporary, it just needs time. But then, her eyes, they didn't follow the script. They didn't soften, didn't adjust, didn't agree. They stayed fixed, locked onto something that refused to align with memory. Because the face in front of her, it wasn't unfamiliar in the way a stranger is unfamiliar. It was worse than that. It was close, close enough to recognize pieces, close enough to see traces of who she used to be, but altered, shifted, as if someone had taken her reflection and moved it slightly out of place, just enough that everything felt off. The symmetry was different. Not dramatically, not in a way that would shock a room full of people, but in a way that unsettled something deeper. The balance she once carried effortlessly, gone. The softness that used to exist without effort, tightened. Her smile, she tried it once, just once, and stopped. Because it didn't arrive the same way anymore. It felt delayed, as if it had to pass through something unfamiliar before it reached the surface. And when it didn't land where it used to. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic. No tears, no collapse. Just a quiet, internal fracture. The kind you don't see, but feel everywhere. She blinked. Once, twice, waiting for recognition, for alignment, for that subtle click that tells you, yes, this is still you. But it didn't come. And the silence, it grew heavier because no one else was reacting. No gasps, No concern, no visible alarm, just normalcy. Polite smiles, carefully chosen words. You look good. It's just part of the process. Give it time. Time. Again. Always time. But time couldn't change what she had already seen, what her eyes had already refused to accept. Because recognition, it's instinctive, immediate, and once it's broken, it doesn't return on command. She stepped back from the mirror, slowly, as if distance might soften the truth, as if space might rearrange what she had just witnessed. But distance only made it clearer. This wasn't swelling. This wasn't temporary. This was different. And the realization didn't arrive all at once. It spread, quietly, through her chest, through her thoughts, through every memory of who she used to be. Because now, those memories had nothing to attach to, no reflection to confirm them, no face to carry them forward, just fragments, and a mirror that no longer answered back. The first invitation she declined felt like nothing. A simple message, a polite response. I'm not available. No one questioned it. Why would they? People disappear for a while all the time. They rest. They reset. They return when they're ready. But this wasn't rest. It was retreat. And it didn't happen all at once. It unfolded quietly, almost invisibly, like everything else that had led her here. One event skipped, then another, then a third that she didn't even open the message for. Because the thought of stepping into a room, of being seen, no longer felt neutral. It felt exposed, not because she had something to hide, but because she no longer knew what people would see. The camera used to be familiar, comforting even, a tool she understood, a space where she could exist without overthinking every angle, every shadow, every micro-expression. But now, the lens felt different, cold, unforgiving. It didn't reflect, it captured. And what it captured, she couldn't control. That was the fear. Not the image itself, but the lack of control over how that image would exist outside of her. A photograph freezes something, makes it permanent. And permanence, after everything, felt dangerous. She avoided mirrors more now. Not completely. That would be impossible. But selectively. Quick glances instead of long stares. Passing reflections instead of deliberate ones. Because every time she looked too long, the comparison began. Uninvited. Unstoppable. The woman in the mirror. And the woman she remembered. They didn't argue. They didn't confront each other. They simply didn't align. And that misalignment, it created a kind of silence inside her that words couldn't fill. Who are you now? The question didn't arrive as a sentence. It arrived as a feeling. A subtle, persistent disorientation. Because identity, it's not just how others see you. It's how you recognize yourself, without needing confirmation. And that recognition was slipping. There were moments when she would catch herself mid-thought, mid-movement, mid-expression, and pause, as if checking, as if asking, does this still belong to me? Even her voice, it felt slightly detached. Not different in sound, but different in ownership, as if it came from someone she was still learning to inhabit. And then there was the outside world, the part she couldn't avoid forever, because no matter how carefully you retreat, life continues to move around you. People ask questions, messages pile up, expectations wait, and eventually, someone notices. Where have you been? A simple question, but loaded, because it assumes there's an answer, a clear one, a version of events that can be explained, summarized, understood. But how do you explain something like this? How do you say, I'm still here, but I don't feel like I am? How do you describe the distance between your memories and your reflection? She tried once, in her head, constructing sentences that sounded reasonable, logical, safe. But every version felt incomplete, because the truth wasn't clean. It wasn't structured. It wasn't something you could place neatly into words. It was fragmented, emotional, unresolved. And the deeper she went into it, the more one question began to echo louder than the rest. If my face was part of who I was, then who am I without it? Not without a face, but without that face. The one that carried her through years of recognition, admiration, certainty. The one that didn't need explanation. The one that felt like home. Because now, home felt unfamiliar. And unfamiliar, when it's your own reflection, is a different kind of loneliness. It's not the absence of people. It's the absence of recognition, of belonging, within yourself. She stood in front of the mirror again one night, longer this time, not searching, not comparing, just standing. And for a brief, fragile moment, she tried to separate them, the woman she was and the woman she sees, as if they were two different people, two different timelines, two versions that somehow crossed paths, but never fully merged. And maybe that was the truth she wasn't ready to say out loud, that this wasn't just about appearance anymore. It wasn't just about features or symmetry or perception. It was about identity, about continuity, about the quiet, essential thread that connects who you were to who you are becoming. And right now, that thread felt strained. It didn't take long. It never does. Silence, in a world that thrives on visibility, is never just silence. It becomes a signal, a question, an invitation for others to fill in the gaps. And they did. At first it was subtle. A comment under an old photo. Where has she been? Then another. She looks different lately, doesn't she? Nothing direct, nothing accusatory. Just enough to suggest that something had shifted, even if no one could name exactly what. But the internet doesn't wait for clarity. It builds narratives out of fragments, a blurred screenshot, a candid image taken at the wrong angle, a comparison, side by side, past and present. And suddenly, the conversation wasn't quiet anymore. It was everywhere. Threads, speculations, headlines that asked questions they already implied answers to. What happened to Bonnie Mbuli? Fans concerned over recent appearance. Has she changed, or is something else going on? Concern, that word again, always wrapped in softness, always carrying something sharper underneath. Because concern doesn't just observe, it evaluates, it compares, it measures what is against what used to be. And the more people talked, the less she spoke. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because nothing she could say would land the way she needed it to. There is no clean explanation for a fractured identity. No statement that can capture the quiet dissonance between memory and reflection. So she chose silence. And silence, ironically, made everything louder. The media filled it first. Carefully worded articles that never crossed a line, but circled it closely. Sources say she's taking time off. Insiders mention a possible transformation. Fans express mixed reactions. Mixed, a polite way of saying divided. Because admiration, it doesn't always survive change. Some fans stayed. Of course they did. They wrote messages filled with reassurance, with loyalty, with something that resembled understanding. We support you no matter what. You're still beautiful. Take your time. Still, that word again, quiet, heavy, unavoidable. But others, they weren't as gentle, not cruel exactly, just honest in a way that forgets there's a person on the other side. She was perfect before. Why would she do this? I don't recognize her anymore. That one, it lingered, not because it was loud, but because it echoed something she had already felt, long before anyone else said it out loud. And then there were the rumors. They moved faster than facts. They always do. Whispers about botched procedures, speculations about insecurity, stories that connected dots no one had actually seen. Each version slightly different. Each version slightly more certain. Until the truth, whatever it was, became irrelevant. Because perception had already taken its place. Friends reached out. Some directly, some cautiously. Their voices softer than the noise outside, but not entirely free from it. You okay? You don't have to explain anything. We're here. And she knew they meant it. But even kindness, even genuine concern, can carry weight when you're already struggling to hold yourself together. Because every question, no matter how gentle, still points to something being wrong, still acknowledges a shift, still reminds you that the world sees it too. She started avoiding messages, not out of indifference, but out of exhaustion, because every interaction required something from her, an explanation, a reassurance, a version of herself that she wasn't sure she could perform anymore. And performance? It had always been her strength. Until now. Now, even the idea of being seen felt like stepping into a space where she no longer knew the script. The camera waited. Opportunities paused. Projects that once felt certain became tentative. Not cancelled. Not officially. Just delayed. Reconsidered. Because in an industry built on image, uncertainty is risk, and risk is rarely embraced. She watched it happen from a distance. The conversations, the interpretations, the quiet shift in how her name was mentioned. Not as a presence, but as a question. And through all of it, she said nothing. No statement, no clarification, no attempt to correct what others believed. Because the truth, the real truth, wasn't something you could package into a headline. It wasn't something you could defend in a comment section. It was too internal, too fragmented, too unfinished. And maybe that was the most isolating part of all. Not the judgment, not the rumors, not even the speculation, but the realization that even if she spoke, no one would fully understand what had already been lost. Questions don't arrive all at once. They seep in slowly, quietly, like water finding its way through cracks you didn't know existed. At first, they were external. Comments, headlines, whispers that didn't belong to her, but somehow stayed with her. But over time, they changed direction. They turned inward, and that's when they became harder to escape. Because a question from the outside can be ignored, but a question from within, it lingers, it repeats, it waits. Sometimes she would sit in silence. No phone, no mirror, no distractions, just space. And in that space, they would begin, soft at first, barely formed. Did I need it? Not regret, not yet. Just a trace of doubt that didn't exist before. A version of herself, somewhere in memory, looking back, not accusing, just asking. And she couldn't quite answer, because the decision had never felt like a mistake when it was made. It had felt reasonable, measured, almost inevitable. So where does regret begin? If nothing felt wrong at the start? Another question, quieter but sharper. What really happened in that room? Not the technical version, not the explanation written in clinical terms, but the truth that lives between intention and outcome. Was it a moment? A detail overlooked? A judgment miscalculated? Or something more abstract? Something that can't be traced back to a single point in time? Because sometimes things don't break in obvious ways. Sometimes they shift, slightly, just enough to change everything. And then, the question no one asks directly, but everyone circles around. Who is responsible? A name, a decision, a choice. But responsibility isn't always clean. It doesn't sit neatly in one place, waiting to be pointed at. It disperses, between voices that advised, between hands that acted, between thoughts that hesitated, but didn't stop. And somewhere in that dispersion, it becomes difficult to separate blame from participation. She thought about it once, not for long, just enough to feel the weight of it. And then she stopped. Because some questions don't lead anywhere useful. They don't resolve. They don't offer closure. They just expand. And expansion, when it comes to uncertainty, can feel endless. There were other questions too, ones that didn't come from pain, but from possibility. Will she return? Not just physically, not just to a set or a stage or a camera, but to that version of herself, the one that moved without hesitation, the one that didn't need to calculate how she would be seen, the one that existed without negotiation. Is that version gone? Or just waiting? Waiting for something to align again. Waiting for recognition to return. Waiting for the mirror to stop feeling like a stranger. And if she does return, what will people see? What will they remember? What will they compare? Because the world doesn't forget easily. It holds on to images. It preserves versions. It replays them again and again until they become fixed in time. And stepping back into that space means stepping into comparison, into expectation, into a narrative that has already been written. Without her, she stood by the window one evening, not looking at herself this time, looking out, at movement, at life continuing in ways that didn't pause for her questions. And, for a moment, just a moment, everything felt distant. The past, the present, even the future, all slightly out of reach. And the questions, they didn't stop. They don't stop. They shift. They evolve. They circle back in different forms. Do I miss who I was? Or do I miss how certain I felt being her? Is identity something you carry, or something you can lose? And if it can be lost, can it be rebuilt? Not the same. Never the same. But something close enough to recognize. Close enough to feel like home again. Or is home, like everything else, something that only exists in memory now? She didn't answer. Not because she couldn't, but because answering would mean choosing a direction. And right now, everything still felt unresolved. The room is quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that soothes, but the kind that waits. The kind that stretches across walls, across objects, across the space between breath and thought, as if something is about to happen, but never does. The mirror is still there. Of course it is. It hasn't moved, hasn't changed, hasn't softened to accommodate anything she's been through. It simply remains, uninvolved, unforgiving, a surface that reflects, nothing more, nothing less. The light falls differently now. Not bright, not harsh, just angled. A narrow stream slipping in from the side, cutting across the room in a way that feels almost deliberate. It doesn't illuminate everything. It chooses. Half her face is caught in it. The other half, left behind. There is no music, no background noise, no distant voice to interrupt the stillness. Just her, standing, not too close, not too far, a distance that feels measured, as if she has learned exactly how far she can stand before recognition becomes too difficult or too clear. Her hands don't move. No instinct to adjust her hair, no reflex to correct an angle, no attempt to soften what the light reveals. That part of her, the part that used to respond automatically, effortlessly, is quiet now, replaced by something slower, more aware, more careful. She looks, not searching, not analyzing, just looking. And for a moment, the need to compare doesn't arrive. The memory of who she was stays still. It doesn't step forward, doesn't interrupt. It lingers somewhere behind her, like a presence that no longer insists on being acknowledged. And the woman in the mirror, she doesn't resist either. She doesn't try to prove anything, doesn't demand acceptance. She simply exists in that light, in that silence, in that space between what was and what is. Time feels different here. Not past, not present. Just suspended. As if this moment doesn't belong to any timeline. As if it's waiting to be named. But no name arrives. Her eyes stay fixed. Not on a flaw, not on a detail, but on something deeper. Something that doesn't have a clear shape yet. Something unfinished. And the longer she stands there, the less urgent everything feels. The questions don't disappear, but they quiet down. The noise from outside, it fades. The expectations, the comparisons, the versions of her that still exist in other people's minds, they drift further away until all that's left is this. A room, a mirror, a light that doesn't ask for permission, and a woman standing in front of something that no longer answers the way it used to. She doesn't turn away. Not this time. Not yet. Because turning away would mean leaving something behind. And she's not sure what that something is. Not sure if it's loss or transition. Not sure if what she's looking at is an ending or something that hasn't found its beginning yet. So she stays, still, unmoving, as if standing there long enough might change nothing and everything at the same time. And the light, it shifts slightly, barely noticeable, but enough to alter the reflection just a little. Not into something new, not into something familiar, just something else. And maybe that's where it rests. Not in certainty, not in resolution, but in that narrow, fragile space where meaning hasn't settled yet, where identity hasn't fully formed, where the image in the mirror is neither who she was, nor entirely who she is, just a presence held in silence, held in light, held in a moment that refuses to close. There are some things that don't disappear. Not completely. They shift, they blur, they become harder to name. And sometimes they remain right in front of you, unanswered, unresolved, unfinished.